Okay. So when we talk about excretory systems, we see an interesting kind of development over the different animal groups. So the phylum Platyhelminthes would be the flatworms. So that would include planaria, but it would also include tapeworms and flukes, so those endoparasites. So when we look at the Platyhelminthes, they have what we call protonephridia. And these protonephridia have these interesting structures called flame cells. And the flame cells have cilia that create a current. And this current draws the fluid into the excretory system. So a current that draws fluid into the tubules. Okay. So if we look at a structure of these protonephridia, okay, this is the excretory system of your planaria. So this is not the digestive system, although it kind of looks like it. So they're just showing the excretory system. So how do you think planaria get their oxygen into their body? Through the surface of their skin, right? So oxygen moves in and carbon dioxide moves out. But with that oxygen moving in, water also moves in. So water would be constantly moving into this organism. And so one way to get rid of that, as well as to get rid of their nitrogenous waste, is to filter that fluid and then get it back out. And so you can see here that there's a cell that has these cilia, and they whip around, and then they create a current which actually sucks stuff up into the tubules. And then they have these openings in the body wall, and so they just kind of pump the fluid back out. And with that fluid goes the nitrogenous waste. So the nitrogenous waste exits that as well. Okay. So those are the protonephridia. So then we could talk about what are the nephridia. And these are actually in the phylum Annelida. So what organism did we dissect that is in the phylum Annelida? Earthworm, right? So the earthworm have nephridia. And so these are in each segment. So they actually urinate out of each segment. So remember, one of the advantages of having earthworms in your soil is they eat dirt, which has bacteria and fungi in it, and then they excrete nitrogenous waste. So the waste comes out, and then that nitrogen can actually be used by plants to grow and to develop. So if we look at the nephridia, they look like this. So this is in blue. Remember that they have a closed circulatory system. So the capillaries are in red. So the nephridia are in blue. And they just draw in the coelomic fluid. And then the good stuff gets taken back up by the blood. And then the nitrogenous waste comes out through these openings in each segment. So they just are urinating out of each segment. Okay. Now there is another type of excretory system in the insects that is called the, so if we look at insects, this is phylum Arthropoda. They have branches off their digestive system that have kind of a cool name. They're named after a person, which they're called the Malpighian tubules. So these branch off of digestive system. and they just filter the coelomic fluid, so the fluid that is in the body cavity. So if an insect takes in extra water and it also eats protein, it's going to produce nitrogenous waste. If it takes in extra salt, you can also get rid of the salts here. And so it just passes it into the digestive tract, and then it comes out with the feces. And so like birds and reptiles, they just have one opening to their excretory system and their digestive system. So the excretory waste and the digestive waste come out together. So if you've ever had a grasshopper poop on your hand, that's what that was. Okay, so we do not have tubules located out throughout our body. All of our tubules are in the kidney. So they're concentrated in the kidney, and the tubules are called nephrons. These are the tubules in the kidney. So blood travels to the kidney, and then it is filtered. So if we look at the function of the kidney, so if we look at function, we have the filtration of blood. We also have a filtrate that we then have to modify. So we have reabsorption of substances from the filtrate. Okay. So here we would go from the filtrate that has been produced, and it's in that tubule, the nephron, and it's going back to the blood. So let's think about like glucose. So if I filter glucose out of my blood, I don't want sugar in my urine. In fact, that's a sign of what disease? Diabetes. So if you have sugar in your urine, that's a bad thing. It means your blood glucose is too high and you can't actually reabsorb all the glucose. So I want to reabsorb the glucose and take it out. I also don't want protein in my urine. So my amino acids want to come back out too, right? So I want to pick that stuff back up, okay? And then we have secretion. And I'll put of substances into the filtrate. Okay, so in this case, it goes from the blood to the filtrate. And one big thing that we get rid of in this way are hydrogen ions. Okay? So if we have too much hydrogen ions in our blood, that means our blood is too acidic. Right? So as it's filtered by the kidney will sense that, and then the blood will actually cause the kidney to take out hydrogen ions, and then your urine will be more acidic. So the acidity of your urine actually varies quite tremendously on what it is like you're eating, right? Because different foods can influence the acidity. It can also be influenced by your respiratory system, because that also influences the acidity of the blood. Okay, so that's the function. So if we look at the types of nephrons, the main type of nephron that most animals have are what are called cortical nephrons. So if we look at the structure of my kidney, the cortex of any organ generally is the outside. So if I look at my cortex of my kidney, it would be the outside. So this is the cortex. The inside is called the medulla. So the outside is called the cortex, the inside is called the medulla. And so the cortical nephrons are only located in the cortex. Okay? So in us, about 85% of our nephrons are cortical in humans. This will make sense because when we talk about the function of the nephrons, what's really important to us are the nephrons called, so there's two different types, which are called the juxtamedullary nephrons. So juxta means next to the medulla. So these extend into the medulla. And although they only make up 15% of the nephrons that we have in our body, in our kidneys, and there's thousands of nephrons, these are the nephrons that are capable of producing highly concentrated urine. So these produce highly concentrated urine, which means that they are responsible for conserving water. So they conserve our water. So that if we go without water, we should start to produce very concentrated, just a little bit of urine, over a given period of time. When we become dehydrated, we're not going to urinate as much. And it's because of those juxtamedullary nephrons. Okay. So let's look at what these nephrons look like. So here's a diagram in your book that shows the blood actually coming in. This is the renal artery carrying blood in, and they say like two-thirds of your blood. Maybe that seems like high. I can't remember what percentage of your blood actually goes to the kidney every time. But anyway, so a lot of blood comes into the kidney to be filtered, and then this is carrying the blood back out. Okay. So these are the parts of the nephron, and I'm actually going to draw it because I think that will help us understand it. Okay, so we have a series of capillaries which are called the glomerulus. So this is my capillary bed where filtration occurs. So remember, capillaries are leaky. So we want blood to come in under high enough pressure that a filtrate is going to be formed. So actually, blood pressure is really important to the kidney because if you have excessively high blood pressure, it can damage the kidney because it can blow out the glomerulus, which is the filtration membrane. Okay. So if I drew my blood vessels, like here, then they come into the glomerulus, like this, and then they come back out, okay? So those are my capillaries. Now surrounding the glomerulus is the tubule that is going to collect the filtrates. Okay. And this actually has a Bowman's capsule. Could be the renal capsule, but the Bowman's capsule. So that collects the filtrate. So hopefully red blood cells do not get into the urine. So we don't want red blood cells. Hopefully we don't have white blood cells. That suggests we have a urinary tract infection, right? Bacteria also. So only things that are soluble in the water come into the tubule, okay? And then this tubule kind of winds around. So I'm just going to put some little meanderings in it. And then we're going to look at one of those juxtamedullary nephrons that extends down into the medulla. So this tubule extends down into the medulla. Okay. So this is just one of thousands of nephrons. that are all aggregated into your kidney. Okay. So this is medulla. This is the cortex. Okay. So this first set of tubules, first part of the tubule, is referred to as the proximal, because it's nearest, convoluted, because of its shape, tubule. PCT, it's abbreviated as. This, because it's further away from the Bowman's capsule, is the distal convoluted tubule. Okay. Does anybody know, has anybody studied this before? What is this called? It's kind of famous. What is that thing that extends down? It's the loop of, nobody studied the kidney before? It's famous. Loop of Henle. Okay. So the thing about this is that different things happen in different parts of this nephron. So this nephron here, we have reabsorption. So this would be like glucose, amino acids, salt. Things get taken out of the filtrate. So that is called reabsorption because it's moving from the filtrates back to the blood. And there's capillaries that are surrounding that. Okay. Here in the distal convoluted tubule, we have secretion. So let's just put a hydrogen ion there. So that means that we're secreting hydrogen ions into the filtration. And then something interesting happens in the loop of Henle. So here, water is drawn out all along the length of this what they call the descending limb. So I'll put the descending limb. Because the filtrate is moving in this direction. So it's moving down, right? It's coming here, it's moving down and around, okay? So then this makes this the ascending limb. Now water moves out passively. So this is an example of osmosis, right? So it is picked up by the circulatory system. So there's capillaries surrounding my loop of Henle and it's picking it up. This does not take energy. So no energy. It's not being pumped. So we're actually using the way that this is set up to reabsorb water because as we move down into the medulla, the salt concentration is higher down deep in the medulla than it is up. And it just sucks the water right out of the loop of Henle. So if there is a cortical nephron, it doesn't extend down into the loop of Henle as far, into the medulla as far, and so water is not reabsorbed by the cortical nephrons, okay? So on this side, on the ascending limb, we have salt moving out. Right? And so this is actually takes energy. So it's not passive, right? So this is what sets up the solute concentrations in the medulla that draws the water out. Okay. So would you think a beaver or a desert rodent would have a larger or a longer loop of Henle? Would a beaver or a desert rodent have a longer loop of Henle? Which one? desert rodents, right? Because the longer the loop of Henle, the more water is going to be reabsorbed across the surface, okay? So if we look at a diagram that shows this, oops, to go back to my topic, sorry. Oops. So in this diagram, we are actually kind of like the rabbit, okay? So this right here just shows the difference between the cortex and the medulla, the dotted line, right? So rabbits, we're kind of like rabbits. We have these loops of Henle that extend a little bit down, but a kangaroo rat is able to conserve so much water that it actually doesn't even ever have to drink water. So if we looked at the water balance in us compared to the desert rodents, like a kangaroo rat, and we have these like down in the southern part of the state, notice that they do not drink water at all, right? We have to drink quite a bit of water. And the reason why we have to drink quite a bit of water is we're not able to get as much water from breaking down our food as they do. So they just are very good at getting water from their metabolism, right? And then they actually lose more water through evaporation because they live in the desert than your typical human. But notice how they produce very little urine, and it is very highly concentrated. So the only other thing that we need to draw on that diagram that I put up there is what is called the collecting duct. Okay, so I'm going to extend this out a little bit. So this would all go to, and I kind of wrote all over it. So this would be my collecting duct. So each collecting duct has multiple nephrons attached to it. All of the filtrate is then going to be collected, and it's just going to drip out of the kidney, and it's going to go out through the ureter to the bladder where it is stored, and then it goes from the bladder out to the urethra. Okay. So that collecting duct, we're going to talk about the significance of that collecting duct and how we can produce more concentrated urine through hormonal mechanisms, including the antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. Okay. So we're going to stop there for today, and we'll finish up on osmoregulation, and then we're going to start on the nervous system. No, the collecting duct is still in the kidney, but it's going to collect all the filtrate from all the nephrons and then take that filtrate right to the bladder. So it just kind of drips into the bladder from the kidney.